Good evening, everyone. Welcome all of you to this special lecture at the close of this academic year. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Anirudh to initiate this lecture series, through which we are able to, that brings us voices of our own senior faculty who otherwise get to speak on different occasions. So it's truly special to hear what they have to say, which comes through years of experience and reflections. Uh, so I'll introduce our today's speaker, Professor Alka Hingorani. Professor Alka is Associate Professor in the IDC School of Design at the IIT Bombay. She is an architect and an art historian, and her book on Mohras and Mohra makers in Himachal Pradesh is called Making Faces, Self and Image Creation in a Himalayan Valley, published by University of Hawaii in 2012. She holds an MA in Design in Photography and PhD in History of Art, both from the University of California, Berkeley, where she also taught briefly before her return to India. She is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Her research interests include art and identity, storytelling as academic practice, and pedagogy at the cusp of classroom teaching and technology. Storytelling as pedagogy is a core pursuit of at the Learn Through Stories Foundation, where she is one of the three founder directors. So we all know most of the people here appears to be from IDC. We all know she enjoys speaking, and certainly we enjoy listening to her. So what could be the better stage to sit back and listen to her? So let me introduce to the topic. It is redesign shifting to lower gear. She just shifted from moving to shifting. Redesign shifting to lower gear. Okay, I thought of introducing this topic, but I'll just let her unfold it.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'd like to begin by thanking, Anirudh Joshi for having started this program. I suppose that's created this opportunity for me. I would like also to thank the head of the department, Professor Venkatesh, for inviting me to speak today and for offering me an opportunity not only to share what I might about education and design and ways of thinking and ways of seeing, but also an opportunity to thank all of you here, friends and colleagues, students, and especially also those students and friends who are no longer at IDC, but who remain an integral part of my journey in this place, and so of my life. Thank you very much for everything that you have given to me, for everything that I have received from here, from you, from this place, the IIT campus, and from the idea of this place. Bharat mentioned the title, and so I'm going to speak about it for just a minute. Redesign, shifting into lower gear. Re stands for regarding. It could also stand for redesigning. And Bharat told me he thought it was like a reply note that you hit on email. So it's a reply probably to the way in which we see design today. Last week I had an encounter that I would like to share with you. I was at a talk on an evolving design process and practice, architectural in this instance, with a group of students working in the Palghar district, where the Warli also live and work and play. My encounter was with the word bigha. It wasn't the first time I had heard the word, of course, and I know too that, as most of you do, that this is a measure for land, for zameen. Most of us think of bigha as an old measure of land, of area, same as tolas are for weight. But unlike tola, bigha is not a standard measure. By that I mean that the equivalent of a bigha in acres or in square meters, as we tend to measure land today, changes from region to region. A bigha is non-standard not because it is whimsical. It does not so much measure the size of the land as it measures its productivity. So, depending on a region, a bigha in one place can be as much as twice the area of land as in another place. How much can grow on it? This depends on so many things in its turn. land features, whether mountainous or flat, soil quality, weather, whether it's arid or rainy, the availability of alternate systems of water retrieval and distribution, irrigation networks, lakes, rivers, water tables. And the sum of it all is that a community, local to a region, calculates a size and designates a measure as a stand-in for an intention. And the intention is of productivity as a measure and sustenance as a marker for land. So while the urban mind sneers at the non-standardness of its definition, at the flexibility in the area measured by a bigha, the farming community's mind reads fixity in it, fixity of sustenance. And the continuing use of this measure reminds me that there are many ways of seeing the world, many ways of citing it, slicing it, making it reflect values of equality and sustenance, of social and individual justice that we hold dear to any idea of civilization. It also reminds me that the marginalization of bigha, that the loss of a measure can become a mismeasure. We must pay attention to such minutiae as the idea behind a measure. The underpinning of the word bigha is, ye zameen kitni upjau hai, right? An understanding of what and how much a land can give, measured against what and how much is needed to live. And then maybe we can think of what makes a civilization more civilized than that which envisions a system of stewardship and effort that takes responsibility to feed us, embeds that immensity in the mundaneness of the measure of land. What is the power of an idea like that? What is the possibility within it? And how do our design minds assimilate and harness such ways of seeing, of knowing? Because the idea, the intent behind what is measured and how, is bigger than the vagaries of its usage. It is bigger than the periodic failures of its implementation. With bigha, intent is the standard and measure follows. Why did I begin with this slide? As designers and as humans, not mutually exclusive conditions, it behooves us to be intensely focused on the world around us. If we wish to intervene in ways that better others' lives, or to address the injustice and malaise that arises in all societies, we must take the time to immerse ourselves in studying and in creating cultural artifacts. Because the germinating impulse of any artifact arises from the cultural ethos of a civilization. To trace one thread, Dui Biga Jomi is a poem by Rabindranath Tagore. It depicts rural Bengal's agrarian hardship and the systemic exploitation of the poor by the powerful through the story of an individual who has lost his land and so his home, and wanders through a thickening mist of misfortune and longing. It inspired Bimal Roy's eponymous film, Do Biga Zameen, in 1953, which wrapped the Tagore poem in the vestment of film. 1953 is almost 3/4 of a century ago. Yet, this is a story still being written in many ways, as the rosters of farmer suicides across our country continue to repeat and recount. We know it more recently also from the farmer protests of 2020-2021 against agricultural liberalization laws that invoked all the old demons of land loss, of the destruction of community, of the abandoning of old ways, underscoring the continuing tensions between much required market-oriented reforms and collective indigenous understandings of local systems of production and sustenance. These indigenous understandings don't have to be old in time. They may be new, but the important thing is that they arise from context, from the need on the ground. And cultural artifacts, films, music, ritual, art, are things that serve a reflective purpose. They represent a deep understanding of the ground from which they arise, which means they mirror and reflect the intentions that underlie cultural mores and long-held beliefs. If I were to ask you to speak of the values that define us as a culture, a civilization, attend to them with seriousness, without play, without art or story or film, without music or poetry, you may realize after some thought that that is not an easy enterprise. We humans are makers of things. In our expressiveness is not only our identity, but also our vision for ourselves, for our communities, and perchance for our shared humanity. For what is at stake in the making of things is not just economic, it is existential. When we look closely and with care at the farmers agitating on the outskirts of New Delhi, designing a way for themselves to cook and eat, launder and bathe, and live together roadside in the tens of thousands for weeks and months, think of the system design. Think of each nugget of need met by someone putting together a solution that will last. Think of networks of care and consolation, because that is what it takes to implement resistance. There is no predictable timeline. Look closely then at how they are communicating within the group and with all the interested parties outside the group, their farmer kin in other states, their extended families, city dwellers, the government. Think of how they disseminate their dissent through dialogue and discussion, through writing and raging, through prayer and play. And what you have in art and film, in maps and machines, in design and poetry, that draw the outline of our collective selves and make us think of who we are and what we do and where we want to go, is the answer to our expressiveness. This is not burden. This is beauty. This is brilliance. But it carries an obligation. Our obligation is the transmission of this ethos. We do not transmit a cultural, social ethos through heredity. We pass it along because we teach it. It grows when we speak of it, becomes stronger when we question it, periodically and regularly. And as a learning institution, deeply embedded in the making of things, this, us here, we who are propagating change through the design and the dissemination of ideas and artifacts, because that is what we do. It behooves us to locate our actions on a continuum, to explain the necessity for change, to express what we may gain from it, to elaborate what is or may be lost, so that we may reconsider. And if we choose change, then we tread slowly, listen carefully, decide deliberately. What I want us to take away from the word biga is that social intent is critical. Intent for community, for larger society, which is also a kind of grounding. Intent defines us in the world we create, the world we make, which then makes us in its own reflection.
Green over grey. It's a slogan. Well, it's a very easy way for many people to understand what I'm trying to do. Everything I do, I cover with greenery. You don't see the work. Of course, it's relatively easy to do in a non-urban situation, but it's also very easy to do in an urban situation, as I've demonstrated with a stepped section building in Fukuoka. They were taken away the only park that the city had, because the city needed to rent it out and needed the income. I study whatever the site requires, whatever the project requires, whatever the client has asked, and then I let it be absorbed, understood. In a certain moment, I come up with some image of what could solve it. I didn't want the people of the city to lose their park. It's the only park they had. I wanted to give back 100% of the ground that the building footprint covers and recover it as greenery. Instead of being horizontal, it was now a series of step sections, and they would have to go up. or take an elevator and then come down. When we were building the building, as the structure was going up, they put up about 35,000 plants. Now we have about 50,000. That means that the birds collaborated. Because of all the greenery, the temperature there in the neighborhood is about 15 degrees Fahrenheit lower. The notion that greenery is for the suburbs and cement is for downtown is a malodorous, nasty idea. You can have greenery downtown, and this building proves it. I'm very, very, very distrustful of manifestos. Manifestos have misguided people for generations and students for their life. Now, I believe very much in writing fables, because if you write a fable to present an idea, it will move him. But if it's a manifesto, as the culture changes, the manifesto loses validity.
For those of you who know the work of Emilio Ambas, this clip is a 2.5-minute short clip from the film Green Over Grey. For those of you who know his work, you know that he's renowned for incorporating greenery in all his projects. This Green Over Grey is also the slogan that embodies Ambas's architectural approach. In Fukuoka, Japan, this building that he talked about right now includes a step garden, a small hill, in fact, that boasts 120 varieties and approximately 50,000 plants, creating a public park on and around the complex. There are two moments in this clip that we just saw that particularly stay with me. One is when he says, "I didn't want the people of the city to lose the park." And the other, when he thanks the birds for their help in converting 35,000 originally planted trees and shrubs into 50,000 within a few years. This spirit of communion with the denizens of the city, as with the birds and plants that populate it, is vital to the architecture that emerges in response. It is as important as the technical fact that this greenery acts as a passive cooling feature that enables the building to be more energy efficient by lowering temperatures during the city's warmer months by up to almost 8 degrees Celsius or 15 Fahrenheit. Every building is an intrusion into the plant kingdom, he says, and is a challenge to nature. We must devise an architecture that stands as the embodiment of a covenant of reconciliation. He doesn't like manifestos, but he clearly likes covenants. As a covenant of reconciliation between nature and construction. Designing buildings so intrinsically connected to the surrounding environment that they cannot be separated from each other. Intent as aesthetic, intent as architecture, intent as measure, not only of purposiveness, but also of an enhanced quality of life. They mustn't lose the park. It's a simple thought and an act of love. Simplicity is not just the removal of clutter from an idea or a product. As John Ive, ex of Apple, has said, simplicity to me is trying to succinctly express the essence of something, its purpose, its role in our life. But merely solving a functional imperative, even with the characteristics of simplicity, clarity, and purposiveness, is insufficient. We also need to attend to love and joy and humor in our designs. This to me is a profundity beyond all profundities. To attend to love and joy and humor when designing for people. Whatever your relationship with Apple products, and I know people hold very strong views on them in both directions, but whatever they may be, I think we can still take these thoughts and use them in designerly ways that we find worthwhile. Love and joy and humor in design. We are not talking personal love here, although that has its place too. The more interesting question is, can love connect the personal to the ethical? Where love begins not with desire, but with responsibility. I'm referencing the work of Emmanuel Levinas here, a 20th century French philosopher who focused particularly on ethics philosophy, and the nature of human relations. When you are creating something not just for yourself, but for a broader population, and when you offer it to them, as this office building designed by Ambas, and then you offer it not only to the people who will work in it and experience it sensorially and functionally, not only to those who will pay for it, but also to the rest of the city, to others who will enjoy the space outside the building as if it belonged to them all, offered them sanctuary, a kind of urban forest, a place to meet with friends or be alone, a path to use as scenic route for other business one might have. When you do that with an architectural space, when you do that with a building that not only serves a functional requirement, but fosters delight and joy and respite in a broader audience, you create a feeling that is very difficult to describe, because it is nuanced in different ways by the different people who use that space, who connect with the author of the design in some sense every time that that space speaks to a need of theirs. One could argue that the frisson of excitement that Ambas felt when he designed this building is the frisson that they experience too when they use it. That there's the connection, the recognition, that through design, someone has sought to better their collective life with intent and also with love and with care. This is a story of time, of the disappearance of a river, of the denuding of a mountain range, the Aravalis in this instance, through logging, of their evisceration through mining, of an already vulnerable arid region descending into drought and desertification. This is the kind of patchy water body that is strewn over the course of the Arvari riverbed by the 1980s. It has ceased to exist as a river, has been gone for 60 years. In the 18th century, the Arvari was the main groundwater recharge stream for hundreds of villages along its banks. Of the two sources of the river, one stream originated near the twin village of Bhaunta, Koilala. Forgive the intense detail. This nugget is important to the story because this is where the climactic moment of the later drama will originate. In these twin villages of Bhaunta, Koilala, where one of the sources of the river abides, but which fact also has been completely forgotten in these villages by the 1980s, because the river has vanished some 60 years earlier, more than 2 generations prior. River gone, even the memory of a river gone. We'll return to this in a moment. One of the things that anyone among you who has any interest in water conservation issues in our country will almost certainly know is the incredible story of the waterman of India, Rajendra Singh. For those among you who don't know of him, he trained as an Ayurvedic doctor, worked in a government job for a few years in the rural parts of the Alwar district of Rajasthan, which is where we are with the Arvari River, while also working for education as a national service volunteer and participating in the work of an NGO called the Tarun Bharat Sangh. This was a transformative phase in his life. Mangu Kaka, an older man in the village where Rajendra Singh lived and worked, told him that all his medicine and all this effort towards education were of no use to the land where rivers ran dry, where people were forced to abandon agriculture and migrate to towns and cities to survive. That if he wanted truly to help, he ought to work to get water back in the land. Mangu Kaka was also among the few who remembered stories from his parents' and grandparents' time of rivers running through this land in days of yore. He trained Rajendra Singh's eyes to the terrain, spoke to him of the tradition of small dams built as call and answer to the terrain, convex on steep slopes, straight on gentle land, concave where there was a natural depression. He trained Rajendra Singh in the use of local materials and basic engineering principles. Together with other villagers, Rajendra Singh began to work on dams and catchment areas. creating johars or dams that we've seen before. The first of these was an existing, though abandoned johar, which was silted over and needed rescue. It was rescued. When the monsoons arrived later that year, something magical happened. Not only did the johar hold water, but downstream from it, a well that had gone dry became filled with water again. Groundwater was being recharged. It took a while. I remember meeting him in the late 1990s when he had been involved in this work for about a decade and a half. And I heard him speak of the revival of a near-dead river that was now perennial. I remember him speaking of the surprising outpouring of seasonal rivers, showing up as groundwater was recharged year after year, of foxes and other fauna returning to forests that didn't exist 15 years ago. It sounded magical. It was magic, and it took time. In the 40 plus years since he first began with the Tarun Bharat Sangh, affected villages and villagers have constructed almost 12,000 johars, mostly in Rajasthan, which has 60% of the country's desert area. Rivers have been revived, land and mountains reforested, underground aquifers recharged. Migrant youth have returned home. Agriculture has revived. Villages have been transformed.
If you do something for water, water gives to everything for us. No water, no food, no fodder, nothing is in the village. Only the old people living in the village, and they are the sick because the malnutrition. So you don't do the treatment of humankind, you treat it to the earth, because this earth nobody treated today. And the economically really big change. Before, no crops, no employment, no grains, no water. Now is the water, now is the grains. Now is the enjoyment in the villages. When I start the work, so my earth is fevered, sick. Now my earth is healthy because the temperature going down 2 degrees. 250,000 wells recharged. More than million people benefited. So this is a really big change in my community. Water conservation and soil conservation is a real revolution.
So many of us know this story of near utter devastation and astonishing revival through community coming together, networks forming and mobilizing to bring back to life a kind of life that was being lost, to revive a land that had given in to desertification. And we know this story through the lens of Rajendra Singh's amazing life. I want to speak for a moment of other lives, lesser known, but equally potent in their effect on this land and its ethos. You will remember I mentioned the twin villages of Bhaunta Koilala a few minutes ago. They are the first villages upstream of the Arvari, hosting one of the sources of the river. Several years of drought had emptied them of their men, who had migrated to cities for work and survival by the 1980s. Located on the periphery of the Sariska Tiger Reserve and sandwiched between two mountain chains, these villages had only barren lands to show, empty wells. In 1986, they heard the story of Rajendra Singh and the villagers of Gopalpura, 20 kilometers away, that they had begun to change the quality of their land and so of their life, the story of their land and so of their waters, that they had formed Gram Sabhas and begun to repair old johars and protect forests around them, all through voluntary labor, even bearing up to 75% of the cost of building all these projects. The name of a man called Rudamal Meena crops up here. The Meena is an indigenous tribe, people that have lived on these lands for a long, long time. They moved from nomadic existence to agrarian practice and were now being driven off the land by these changes. Not back to a nomadic existence where families and communities travel together, carrying their sense of rootedness in and owing it to a group. This migration disrupted families, emptied villages of men. Rudamal had become a migrant worker too, but he became convinced to remain in his village after a visit to a relative in Gopalpura, after seeing how a single johar had changed the life of the villagers. There was water, he remembers. Can you imagine someone speaking of a thing as fundamental as that with wonder? There was water, he remembers, and hope of a better life. And so he stayed. And then he convinced his community to become involved in water management. By the time the first monsoon arrived after this decision and the new johars began to fill with water, they realized that soil erosion threatened the functional integrity of these johars. So it became time to pay attention to reforestation. As johars were built with the voluntary labor of villagers, who also paid for the bulk of the cost of these projects, they began to see water levels rise downstream. In places where water hadn't been available even as far down as 90 meters, in 3 to 4 years, it rose first to 9, then 4.5 meters. As community came together, community became paramount. People worked in villages upstream and down, understanding, then harnessing the geoscience of water. If we capture water upstream, it will percolate faster downhill, benefiting villages downstream, they thought. They were now invested in the water needs of the larger landscape and of other communities, without which it would not be possible to nurture the watershed of Arvari, to bring it back to life. As this effort grew, so did the ambitions of the cohort of villages and villagers. Aware now of the movement of groundwater, they kept the network of johars in mind when selecting a site for a new one. After one such estimation of the submergence area in new plans, it was found that 5 bighas of Rudamal's agricultural land would be submerged. I agreed without hesitation, he says. After all, it was for the benefit of the village. This sacrifice was unprecedented, according to Rajendra Singh, inspirational even, and set the tone for a stronger communal bond among the villagers. It took 3 and 4 and 6 years before the Arvari began to flow again as a perennial river. I am proud, said Rudamal, that the Arvari got a new lease of life on my land. It gives me a never-ending attachment with the river. From this dry riverbed to a full-flowing river took time and intent. But as we know only too well, there are other ways that time can be too, becoming so short and splintered and swift that we are left with very little besides the possibility of rapid-fire reasoning and short-term thinking. Time runs fast and intent runs narrow in our day and age. We have companies that only respond to the term shareholder value, for instance. They daren't even include stakeholder value, which might broaden the field a little. The pithy punchline of move fast and break things, or build fast and break things, dictates our designing days and nights. There are some segments in a design process that could avail of an exhortation like that, benefit from it. But breaking stuff and moving quickly leaves us surrounded by carnage. John Ive again. More and more design voices are now speaking up against it. Disruption and destruction are not synonyms, and speed should not be equated or mistaken for progress. I wonder if one of the reasons that technology has become so dependent upon exploiting the addictive tendencies of our bodies and brains If one of the reasons is that we have set up speed as the measure for winning whatever game it is we think we are playing, we need to get there first. We need to beat the competition. We say we need to measure the health of companies by asking them for quarterly reports. Quarterly. What can you do of any merit in just 3 months? Where is the time for us as individuals, as a society, as a species, to stop and consider the merits and demerits of what is unfolding before us, unraveling our social systems, untethering us from community that is near to hand, while our consciousness escapes to faraway places? When cornered by an ethos like that, with speed as the only or primary measure, how can we not feel compelled to follow any path that makes us come out ahead? And so we look at shortcuts. Why consider the ethics of exploiting addictive tendencies when that would slow you down? And meanwhile, someone else gets the numbers required for the next cycle of funding or profiteering. This pursuit doesn't even have to be malicious. It only needs to be careless. And it isn't as if there is no discussion. It is all around us. We can hear it in shouts and in whispers. But the concern and the ways of addressing such concern come too late. From all the evidence that we have currently available, we are unable to keep pace in our reflection with the speed at which change is happening. Because cogitation, reflection, needs time as much as it needs intent. The question to ask also, perhaps, is how did we get here? What is it that we have acceded for this insatiable competitiveness, this sense that only one can win, and that by wiping out competition, that it is acceptable for the winner to take all? How did we get here? We will not know unless we quieten our own desires. We will not reflect unless we slow the pace of our power to transform and consume. We will not change until we listen to sounds, to voices that are not ours. Those hands at the edge of the frame, the left hand top, sticks in readiness to join the circle, will not stand in that corner for long. Most of you will have recognized these dance forms. There is a chain of people dancing together. And this chain of dancing humans will open to the intent of the outsider wishing to join mid-dance, to include him or her as another link in the chain. Equally effortlessly, when someone wishes to step out of the circle, the remaining chain will shift to close the gap again. This coming and going is contained in the steps, the movement, the beat of the dance, without ceremony or convulsion or clamor. This is not an accommodation, it is an attitude, an ethos of embrace and inclusivity through dance. It may take an anthropologist's eye to speak of the meaning in gesture and ritual, but the environment thus created makes it easy for anyone to interpret correctly a kind of communal openness and inclusivity in this dance of easy integration and release. Environment is not merely physical, it is also attitudinal. Talk to a wheelchair-bound person or a person who is blind, and they will tell you that impairment and disability are two separate things. Vision impairment does not prevent a person from having other faculties. They can think, they can hear, they can do. It is societal expectation which, when lowered, makes that person seem and feel disabled. An affliction of the lower limbs that makes a person wheelchair-bound does not prevent her from participating in public life. The lack of ramps and elevators in a public building does. She has already addressed her impairment, wheels for legs, but the environment makes her disabled. If there is a class or a seminar on the second floor of a building, and the building has a ramp and an elevator, then we are all getting to the same place, whether we are using legs or wheels. Let's look at a wider context. When we design for cars to run on flat ground, while insisting through imaginatively named skywalks that people should climb 2 stories to cross a road, then climb down again, we disable even those with temporary impairments, such as a person who may have had an accident and is recovering from a broken leg, or a pregnant woman, or an older person, or even a little child who is excited about walking, having just recently learned to do so, but is uncertain on her feet. If, on the other hand, a motorized vehicle is made to use a flyover, while pedestrians use flat ground to cross the road, and if that flat ground is made green with trees and plants, everyone wins. Here's a quick look at what is possible when transportation intent meets broader social good. I'm going to badly mispronounce this. It's a Korean word, but forgive me. The Cheongye River in the heart of Seoul City ran underground for almost 3/4 of a century. Because mid-20th century urban development in South Korea focused on economic development, which did not include any understanding of or concern for ecological impact. So this river that ran through the heart of the city was filled over, roads built on it, a major artery in fact. We see that in our own city today, with the wetlands filled in so that we can have a major business hub in BKC. We have a river called Methi, the irony of its name completely lost on those that permit industrial sludge and untreated sewage to run into it unhindered. In Seoul, though, as infrastructure crumbled and citizen health deteriorated, they decided to free their imprisoned river, divert traffic away from the heart of the city, and offer citizens a space of respite and recreation instead. Right here, in the middle of the city. Here's the before and after picture. It is a designed urban waterfront now, rather than the natural stream that it was before. But it has had a salubrious effect on the life in the city. And there have been no complaints about the diversion of traffic. Good design is inclusive design. And inclusive design is for everyone. Returning to the rejuvenation of rivers in the Alwar district, in order to sustain both stake in and responsibility for the health of these rivers, a river panchayat was set up. Representatives from each and all villages on the banks of these rivers would meet regularly to determine how much water could be drawn by upstream villages and for what purpose, so that neither the river nor those that lived downstream suffered. These decisions depended also on the strength of the monsoon in a given year and on the choice of native crops over water-intensive agriculture. At village level, Gram Panchayats discussed these matters too, in a form of direct democracy, where everyone in the village could participate in the discussion. As we go from village populations to towns and towns to metro cities, it begins to seem impossible to practice anything but representational democracy, given that populations become really large and unwieldy. We have enormous diversity in the socio-economic matrix, and it doesn't seem easy to find common ground. But there is an experiment being attempted in New York City as I speak. There are these hearings being organized by the mayor's office called rental rip-off hearings. They are being set up all around the city to allow tenants to talk directly to city officials and describe the dangerous or unhealthy conditions that their landlords refuse to fix. Rats, mold, construction issues, or the hidden fees that they are charged in their rents. There has been a long period of neglect of rental housing in New York City, and the new mayor, Zohran Mamdani, campaigned on making the city safer and more livable for its many denizens. Look at the list of promises on his campaign poster. His first 100 days have already shown him working on several of these, and rental pain is one of them. He is also asking people to participate in establishing policy priorities. Around the room are arrayed poster boards, which seek inputs on policy proposals like fining landlords who do not make timely repairs, allowing tenants to form unions, and other such ideas. People are also encouraged to offer their own policy initiatives or alternatives to address the everyday concerns of living in one of the largest cities in the US. It prioritizes people over powerful lobbyists, changes how the success of a city may be measured. Every promise on the campaign poster is directed at bettering the life of the ordinary citizen. Each promise an act of caring. And it is a daring idea to involve people in an interactive process with city officials for policy development in as large and diverse a city as New York. These are Sheher Panchayats in a city of 8 million people. Not so different from the Gram or River Panchayats in our Alwar district, are they? It is brilliant as strategy to build hope in process, to have people suggest ideas, then see them come to fruition. It is brilliant as a community building tool to make neighbor friend to neighbor as tenant unions sprout and blossom. And it is brilliant in its underpinning of trust in people, in process, in shared social intent. I have talked about 3 things, and I'm close to winding up now. Intent, time, and place, in that order. Each intersects the other though, as you have seen. Each overlaps the other, imbricates the circles of influence. Time and place make context. Time and place and intent make ethos, both social and cultural. From Emilio Ambas's architecture, green over grey, they must not lose the park, to the villages in Alwar district and the design of modular, spread out, communally built infrastructure, using not only local materials and local labor, but also designing local networks of care and sustenance. To New York City and its experiment of system design that upends the ways in which representative government has so far been used for large population groups. One thing shines through every shift in perspective. People coming together for a common cause, where caring for another is the driving impulse behind design and decision making. When this happens, we find also that the ideas that people bring to the table become more sophisticated. Look closely at the design process followed by Ambas, and how at every step it is not only his client in the narrow sense of who is paying for the project, but also the context of the building, and a concern for all other stakeholders affected by its presence. Watch the villages in Alwar as more and more villages become involved in water conservation, and you see how decisions about the Johar become decisions about its network, so that the water table in the entire area around and along the river may be raised sufficiently to rejuvenate underground aquifers, which do not respect village boundaries so much as they do local geology, but that breathe life into the river that will sustain an entire geography. Villages both upstream and down. At such scale, looking out for one another becomes responsibility, becomes obligation. This kind of coming together is also an aggregation of humans attached to a shared ethos of caring, which creates the space for course correction when conclusions arrived at or decisions taken turn out to be inadequate or incorrect. Cooperation rather than competition is at its core. Through design and by design, to care and be cared for is everything. Thank you.